Greetings and a warm welcome to episode 16 of the Australia-China Media Watch podcast. In this week, starting from Monday the 28th of February, running through to Sunday the 6th of March, there were 19 articles in the Global Times relating to Australia. And in contrast, Sky News Australia had 2 articles about China. Let's begin with a quick scan of each of the headlines. Published on the 1st of March, certain politicians urged to end political publicity stunts. FM Commissioner's Office to the UK. Next headline, off to promising start. Published on the 1st of March in the business column. Moving along. Tonga volcanic eruption unlikely to significantly affect climate or overwhelm long-term global warming trend, according to a study. Keep the door open. Published on the 1st of March. Champion Quartararo fears Ducati speed while Marquez revs up. Published on the 1st of March. The 1st of March as well. August steps up flood relief efforts as rain shifts south. The next headline reads, action is needed now. Next, New Zealand's Test crown teetering after South Africa defeat. Published on the 2nd of March 2022. The next headline reads, forget about 2 wars, US is reluctant to fight even one. The next headline, on the 3rd of March, defense budget expected to rise according to experts. Sydney braces for heavy floods. Indian netizens swarm to Twitter to support Russia, and even more around the world criticize the West, US hypocrisy. Perry to Burma, published on the 4th of March. PLA warships wrap up far sea drills after Australia's laser incident hype. On the 5th of March, China boosts defense budget by 7.1% for 2022 amid complex global situation. Published in the military section of the Global Times, China's 7.1% defense budget growth restrained. Published on the 6th of March with the headline, Shane warns body prepared for autopsy ahead of repatriation. Found in the Asia Pacific column is the next headline, Sydney expects more rain as death toll from floods rises. And the final article for the week from the Global Times relating to Australia. This is found in the editorial column on the 6th of March. This headline reads, China's military development need not prove its innocence to the US and the West, according to a Global Times editorial. So 19 mentions of Australia in the Global Times, and in contrast, 2 responses 2 mentions of China in Sky News Australia, and they come with the following headlines. And they are, China slams Western nations for deliberately taking sides on Russian-Ukraine crisis. And the other article in question, only China can stop Putin, says Peter Dutton. That's the overview of the headlines. Stick around if you like to more closely unpack the articles one by one. Let's keep moving along. The first article we're going to look at from the Global Times, published March the 1st, 2022 at 10:37 p.m. is the article with the following headline: Certain politicians urged to end political publicity stunts, according to the FM Commissioner's Office to Hong Kong. So it comes in the China Society section of the Global Times with this opening paragraph. The Commissioner's Office of the Chinese Foreign Ministry in the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region, Hong Kong SAR, has urged politicians to end their political publicity stunts over Hong Kong affairs, respect facts, and refrain from further political grandstanding. The spokesperson of the Commissioner's Office strongly disapproved of and firmly rejected the statement of the Inter-Parliamentary Alliance on China and misleading remarks of a few American politicians for making a case for anti-China elements in Hong Kong. They clamored for sanctions against Chinese officials in addition to slamming the central government's policy toward Hong Kong and the national security law. By exploiting the first anniversary of the law-based detention of the relevant criminal suspects, some political figures banded together to smear the Hong Kong SAR government and whitewash the suspects. The spokesperson pointed out, noting that the move is unsurprising. Australia is mentioned once in this article and appears right here, and it reads, on Monday, the Inter-Parliamentary Alliance, which consists of politicians from the US, the EU, India, and Australia, signed a statement calling for the release of 47 people who were charged or detained under the national security law for Hong Kong. The spokesperson pointed out that the unmistakable evidence has proved the relevant people are suspected of subverting state power, a crime under the law. Based on this initial impression, one might make the argument that Australia is constructed in this case in a somewhat negative way for being a part of this inter-parliamentary alliance, signing a statement calling for the release of 47 individuals who were charged or detained under the national security law for Hong Kong. No further mentions of Australia is found in this article, and with that we can move along to the next piece, which is a photo story entitled Off to Promising Start by CNS Photo, published on the 1st of March 2022 at 10:24 p.m. and this is found in the photo / business section of the Global Times. In this instance, Australia is mentioned, I would think, in a neutral manner. There's a caption describing the photo, and that caption reads, employees work at an assembly line for bicycle frame parts at a company in Huai'an, East China's Jiangsu province on March the 1st, 2022. The company has ramped up production for orders from Australia and Japan, among other overseas markets, off to a promising start of the year. So based on that caption, I think Australia is represented and constructed here in a neutral way. Moving along to the next article, and this was published 1st of March by the writer Zhang Hui, Global Times reporter covering IR, international relations, politics, public health, as well as science. So it reads, Tonga volcanic eruption unlikely to significantly affect climate or overwhelm long-term global warming trend, according to a study. The article is accompanied with a photo taken on the 14th of January 2022, shows the eruption of a volcano in Tonga. The opening paragraph of this article reads, a group of Chinese scientists concluded that the eruption of the Tonga volcano will not be strong enough to significantly affect the global climate or overwhelm the long-term global warming trend, based on their fresh analysis of the possible cooling effect of the sulfur dioxide injected into the atmosphere by the volcanic eruption in January. Now, I think there's one mention of Australia in this article, and it appears in the following paragraph, and that reads, the cooling as a result of the sulfur dioxide injected into the atmosphere. So the cooling in the southern hemisphere will be stronger than in other parts of the world, with the strongest cooling of more than 0.01 degrees Celsius occurring in parts of Australia and South America. Based on this impression, I think this is a neutral representation of Australia. And with that in mind, we move along to the next article, which was published on the 1st of March by the author Ji Yuqiao, Global Times cultural news reporter covering movies, TV series, Chinese fictions, and other cultural topics. The article is accompanied by a number of photographs as well as a screenshot, and the captions for the first paragraph reads, patrons view artworks during a preview of the major exhibition Matisse, I hope I'm reading that correctly, apologies if I'm not, Life in Spirit, masterpieces from the Centre Pompidou in Sydney, Australia on November 19th, 2021. The opening paragraph of this article reads, I'm probably going to get my pronunciation incorrect for a number of the names, the fate of an exhibition on French artist Henri Matisse, set to open in March in Beijing and Shanghai, is said to be up in the air after Christian Pure, apologies if I got that wrong, president of the Departmental Council of Nord, announced on Friday that the event was being cancelled because of political ties between China and Russia. The news left many fans of the artist in China disappointed and confused over the cancellation. The following paragraph has this to say: art should never succumb to politics. Although artists come from certain countries, their masterpieces belong to humanity. For this reason, the French side should not hinder normal art exchanges between the two countries based on political factors. So far, we have not received an official notice on the cancellation of the exhibition. An employee at the Yulens Center for Contemporary Art, the organizer and host of the exhibition in China, told the Global Times on Monday. So I believe there is one mention of Australia in the article, and it appeared in the captions accompanying the photographs, and based on that impression, I think Australia in this case is represented or constructed in a neutral manner, but is there more than meets the eye here, or something I'll need to consider when I review this huge and growing body of evidence. With that in mind, we move along to the next article. This is published on the 1st of March as well, originally by the AFP, found in the sport section with the headline, I'm gonna get this pronunciation incorrect, Champion Quartararo fears Ducati speed while Marquez revs up. Opening paragraph reads, MotoGP opens a marathon session or season on Sunday in Qatar with champion Fabio Quartararo trying to hold off Francesco Bagnaia on the faster Ducati, while both glance back anxiously at Marquez. I believe there is a single mention of Australia in this article, and it appears in the concluding paragraph of the piece, and that reads, Finland makes its belated return after a 40-year gap. Indonesia, which hosted 2 races in the 1990s, is also added. Australia, Argentina, Japan, Thailand and Malaysia all cancelled in each of the last 2 seasons, are scheduled to run in a season that stretches to November 6th. Based on this impression, I think Australia is represented here in a neutral way. We move along to the next article, and this is published on the 1st of March, originally by Reuters, 5:51 p.m. with the headline, Australia steps up flood relief efforts as rain shifts south. So found in the World/Asia Pacific section of the Global Times. The article is accompanied with a photograph with the captions, an aerial view of the flooded city of Maryborough, Australia, along the overflowing Mary River on February 28th, 2022. The opening paragraph of the article reads, military helicopters airlifted stranded people from rooftops of flooded neighborhoods in eastern Australia, and a 10th victim was found on Tuesday following days of torrential rain as the wild weather slowly shifts south toward the city of Sydney. The death toll rose to 10 after a woman believed in her 80s was found dead inside a flooded property, police said. Floodwater from the deluge, which began late last week, submerged several towns and bridges in Queensland and New South Wales, and was moving to the south with heavy rains and possible flash flooding forecast for Sydney. So Australia is mentioned a number of times in this article, 7 in total. Some of the key mentions of Australia come in the following paragraphs. Sydney, Australia's largest city and home to more than 5 million people, could receive up to 150 millimeters of rains within a 6-hour period on Tuesday afternoon, according to the Bureau of Meteorology. Australia is mentioned again in the following 2 paragraphs. Australia's east coast summer has been dominated by the La Nina climate pattern, which is typically associated with greater rainfall for a second straight year. And Brisbane, Australia's 3rd largest city, received around 80% of its annual rainfall over the last 3 days, according to the Queensland Premier. Based on this impression, I would make the argument Australia is represented here in a neutral, if not somewhat supportive manner. Something I need to reconsider when I start to analyze all of this data. Moving along to the next article, and this comes with the headline, Action is Needed Now. Originally published by Reuters and found in the Global Times, March the 1st, 2022 at 5:32 p.m. It comes with the headline, Action is Needed Now. It's found in the Eye on World section of the Global Times, and it's accompanied with the following subheader, Coastal cities found unprepared as IPCC flags climate risk hotspots. So the opening paragraph of this article reads, but before we get there, the article is accompanied with a photograph with the following captions. Vehicles drive through the busy highways in Jakarta, Indonesia on November 30th, 2021. On January 18th, Indonesia's parliament approved a bill to relocate the country's capital from Jakarta to Nusantara in East Kalimantan. The opening paragraph of the article reads, the opening line rather, Indonesia plans to move its sinking, flood-prone capital to a remote jungle. Such a drastic step likely become increasingly necessary as cities and coastal areas face a heightened threat of climate change-linked losses. 270 leading climate scientists warned on Monday, adding that many high-risk areas were unprepared, or ill-prepared rather. It clearly shows they were not prepared at all. Harjit Singh, a senior advisor with Climate Action Network International, a network of more than 1,500 groups, said about the scientists' report for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. In this piece, Australia is mentioned once, and it appears in the following paragraph. It requires a significant amount of finance dedicated to adaptation and climate resilient development and added government capacity, which we are not seeing at the moment, said Edney Brown, head of research and investigations at Greenpeace Australia Pacific. Based on this impression, I think Australia is represented in a neutral manner. I'm not sure if there's more to decode with this one. I suspect there are some undertones in the way the article is constructed, but based on this initial impression, I'm just putting it down as neutral and certainly worth revisiting during the analysis. We'll move along to the next piece, and this is found within the sports section of the Global Times with the headline, New Zealand's Test crown teetering after South Africa defeat. Originally published by the AFP, March the 1st, 2022, 5:19 p.m. The opening paragraph of the article reads, New Zealand's hopes of defending their World Test Championship suffered a major setback when South Africa crushed them by 198 runs in the second test in Christchurch on Tuesday. It was New Zealand's third defeat in 6 tests over the past 3 months, and their second at home, where they have enjoyed being almost unassailable in recent years. Australia is mentioned twice in this article, and this is what they're saying. With the teams ranked by the win percentage, Sri Lanka head the championship table with 2 from 2, 100%, followed by Australia with 4 wins from 5. And the next paragraph, which reads, Sri Lanka start a 2-test series in India this week, while Australia have a 3-test series against Pakistan. Based on this impression, I think Australia is represented in a neutral manner. And with that said, we can move along to the next piece, which appears in the opinion/observer section of the Global Times. And the headline reads, Forget about 2 wars. The US is reluctant to fight even one. March the 1st, 2022, 11:47 p.m. The opening paragraph of the article reads, Perhaps no country in the world yearns for a change in its declining image more than the US. Thus, Kurt Campbell, White House Indo-Pacific Policy Coordinator, put forward his opinion on Monday. The US can focus on 2 theaters, the Indo-Pacific and the war in Europe. He wants to prove that the US is still dominant and its might remains unrivaled. The hard truth is Washington is reluctant to step into even one theater of war. During an event hosted by German Marshall Fund, a U.S. think tank, Campbell said that Washington had been deeply engaged in two theaters simultaneously before, including during World War II and the Cold War. It's difficult, it's expensive, but it is also essential, he emphasized. Australia is mentioned once in this article, and it appears in the following paragraph, and it reads, Campbell's following remarks soon exposed his attempt to mislead the audience. He named a few events to show the U.S. quote-unquote determination to sustain high-level engagement with the Indo-Pacific region, including a scheduled summit with Southeast Asian leaders in March and a planned summit of the Quad grouping of the US, Australia, Japan, and India in May. He was just playing with words by deliberately mentioning the word theater. Campbell equated dealing with two US political rivals at the same time with fighting in two wars against two US adversaries simultaneously. Shen Yi, a professor at the School of International Relations and Public Affairs of Fudan University, told the Global Times. Based on this impression, I think I'll make the argument that Australia is represented in a somewhat negative way. With that in mind, we'll move along to the next article. And this one deals with China's defense budget and how it's expected to rise. Found in the military section of the Global Times, this headline reads, China's defense budget expected to grow at around 7% in 2022 amid security threats, according to experts. Analysts cite economy, geopolitical uncertainties, developmental needs as factors. Written by Liu Xuanzun, defense reporter at the Global Times covering weapons and military development, and Leng Shumei, published March 3rd, 2022 at 10:19 p.m. The article is accompanied with a photograph of military hardware, and it reads, an army main battle tank rolls out of a naval air-cushioned landing craft during a joint combat training exercise conducted by an army brigade and a naval landing ship group under the PLA Southern Theater Command on February the 8th. The opening paragraph of this article reads, ahead of China's announcement of its defense budget for 2022, analysts and observers predict that the country will likely continue to steadily increase its military expenditure at a rate possibly slightly faster than last year, as China enjoys a positive economic development but faces security threats. The two factors provide a foundation and need for China to further develop its national defense capabilities to safeguard national sovereignty, territorial integrity, and rightful interess. The amount is expected to be released in a draft budget report at the opening of the annual session of the National People's Congress, the country's top legislature said on Sunday. Multiple military experts reached by the Global Times believe that the budget could grow by about 7%. In March 2021, China announced a defense budget of 1.5 trillion yuan, or $209 billion, a 6.8% increase, faster than the 6.6% increase in 2020, despite COVID-19, which had an impact on China's economic growth in both years. China has maintained a single-digit growth in its annual defense budget since 2016, and China will likely continue to expand its military expenditure this year, as the defense spending should be closely related to the development of the national economy. Fu Qianshao, a Chinese military expert, apologies if I get the pronunciation of that incorrect, told the Global Times. Some other interesting nuggets of information over here. You have China's GDP expanding at 8.1% in 2021, growing the fastest in nearly a decade, and landing well above the government's annual target of achieving a growth rate of above 6% for that year. Australia is mentioned twice in this article. It appears in the following paragraph. And just to provide a bit more context, I'm going to start reading from the paragraph before. So the US has been applying military pressure on China over the past few years, stirring up trouble on the doorsteps of China through operations like provocative monthly warship transits in the Taiwan Straits, close-in reconnaissance missions with spy planes in the East China Sea and the South China Sea of more than 1,200 times in 2021, and a number of warship intrusions in Chinese territorial waters in the South China Sea in the name of quote-unquote freedom of navigation. Over the past year, the US also rallied its allies and partners around the world to provoke and confront China militarily. Under the US's bullying banner, countries far away from the region like France, Germany and the UK sent warships to the South China Sea. The US also organized the Security Dialogue Quad with Japan, India and Australia, and formed the new Security Pact AUKUS with Australia and the UK, both designed to surround China militarily. So a couple of things to unpack. First is the use of the concept under the US's bullying banner, a very visual description if I might add. And the second is this security dialogue, the Quad with Japan, India and Australia, the new Security Pact AUKUS with Australia and the UK, are designed to surround China militarily. Based on this impression, I think it's clear and pretty clear that Australia is being represented and constructed in a negative manner. We'll move along to the next article. This was originally published by the AFP, March the 3rd, 2022 at 5:32 p.m. in the Asia Pacific section of the Global Times, and it comes with this headline: Sydney braces for heavy floods, with hundreds of thousands of residents told to prepare to flee. The article is accompanied with a photograph with the following captions: Emergency service volunteers observe the Windsor Bridge under rising floodwaters along the Hawkesbury River in suburban Sydney, Australia on March the 3rd, 2022. Photo credits the AFP. The opening paragraph reads: Emergency services ordered some Sydney residents to prepare to flee Wednesday as heavy rainfall barreled down Australia's east coast, burying towns in floodwater, killing 13 and putting hundreds of thousands, I'm not sure if there's a missing word in the article, hundreds of thousands of lives at risk. Moving along, the next line reads, the week-long torrential downpour has swollen rivers and reservoirs past the bursting point, causing chaos in an area 800 kilometers long. Australia is mentioned 5 times in the article. So firstly in the captions, secondly in the opening paragraph, and another mention of Australia here. The focus has now shifted to Sydney, Australia's largest city and home to more than 5 million people. And you have the remaining ones with a La Nina weather pattern has caused Sydney to experience its wettest summer in 30 years. Scientists say climate change is making Australia's floods, bushfires, cyclones and droughts more frequent and more intense. Despite decades of warnings from scientists about climate change, Australia is unprepared for the supercharged weather that it is now driving, such as the current floods, said environmental expert Hilary Bambrick of the Queensland University of Technology. Based on this impression, I think Australia is represented here in a neutral manner. And with that, we can move along to the next article. Published on the 4th of March by Liu Xin, who co-leads the Global Times China desk, and Wang Wenwen, chief reporter of the Global Times, as well as commentator on US politics and Asian security. The headline for this piece reads, Indian netizens swarm to Twitter to support Russia and even more around the world to criticize the West, US hypocrisy. The article is accompanied with a photograph with the following captions. The United Nations Security Council votes on a draft resolution requesting a United Nations General Assembly emergency session on Ukraine at the UN headquarters in New York on February 27, 2022. The UN Security Council, or the UNSC, on Sunday adopted Resolution 2623 that calls for an emergency special session of the United Nations General Assembly to consider and recommend collective action on the Ukraine crisis. Photo credits to Xinhua. The opening paragraph of this article reads, Twitter has witnessed thousands of posts with hashtags like hashtag stand with Russia and hashtag stand with Putin in recent days. A response from Indian netizens toward the US's reportedly implicit sanctions against India for abstaining in the UN vote on Ukraine. The discussion started by Indian netizens have seen even more netizens from around the world join in to criticize the US and Western countries' hypocrisy for their full support of Ukraine while keeping silent to the deaths caused by themselves and NATO around the world. The topic supporting Russia have attracted more Indian netizens, especially after some media cited US officials as saying that the US is considering sanctions on India over the purchase of a missile defense system from Russia after India had abstained from a vote at the UN General Assembly condemning Russia over the conflict in Ukraine. Australia is mentioned twice in this article, and they both come from the same paragraph. And just to provide a bit more context, I'm going to read the previous paragraph as well. So some Indian netizens commented that Russia helps India when needed, and therefore India would support Russia amid this tough time when everyone is blindly hating our biggest ally. Some praised Russia President Vladimir Putin for fighting for his country and fighting for the destruction of the monopoly of US and Western countries. As of Thursday, hashtag I stand with Putin had become a trending topic on Twitter in 12 countries, including Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa, the US, Australia, Pakistan, Canada, the UK and India, and ranked 25th in global trends. It was the top trender on Twitter in India, Kenya and Nigeria, second place in the US, and third in Australia. The news website guancha.cn noted. Based on this impression, I'm not sure where this sits off the bat. My instinct is to go with it's a pretty neutral construction. It's simply highlighting or identifying that this hashtag has become trending in Australia. So I'm gonna put down with this impression, with this first contact, probably a neutral representation. I'm not sure. If you have a different opinion, please let me know. With that, we'll move along to the next article, and it's entitled 5 Players to Watch at the Women's World Cup, with the subheader Perry to Verma, found in the sport section of the Global Times and published March the 4th at 2:43 p.m. The opening paragraph reads, the Women's Cricket World Cup began Friday in New Zealand after a year's delay because of the pandemic, and with Australia favourites to lift the trophy. The article is accompanied with a photograph with the following captions, and they read, Australia's Elise Perry on the right sends down a delivery as England's Danny Wyatt looks on during the women's one-day international cricket match between Australia and England in Melbourne, Australia on February the 8th, 2022. Australia is mentioned several times in the article, 7 I believe. And 3 of them had appeared in the captions. The 4th appearance is from the opening paragraph. Australia is mentioned again in parentheses next to Elise Perry's name. And Australia is mentioned once more with the following paragraph. Elise Perry's status as one of the game's greats is already secure, but the all-rounder has a point to prove in New Zealand after her shock axing from Australia's 2020 squad. No further mentions of Australia in this article apart from a mention of the Women's T20 World Cup in Australia. Based on this initial impression, I'm leaning towards categorizing this article as representing Australia in a somewhat, if not positive, manner, highlighting an Aussie player as one of the top 5 players to watch at the Women's World Cup. I think this looks pretty optimistic. This looks pretty positive. The first one for the week, I think. They've all been pretty neutral so far. Let's keep going. This next piece appeared in the military section of the Global Times with the headline, PLA warships wrap up far sea drills after Australia's laser incident hype. Written by Guo Yuandan and Liu Xuanzun, defense reporter at the Global Times, covering weapons and military development. The article is accompanied by a photograph of the amphibious dock landing ships Wuzhishan, Kunlunshan, and Changbaishan, attached to a landing ship flotilla with the Navy under the PLA Southern Theatre Command steam alongside in waters of the South China Sea during a maritime training exercise on November 18th, 2020. Photo credits to the Chinese military.com.cn website. The opening paragraph of the article reads, warships of the Chinese People's Liberation Army, the PLA, Navy wrapped up a series of combat alert patrols and far sea drills on Thursday that covered the South China Sea, the East Indian Ocean, and the West Pacific. The PLA Navy announced after Australia falsely accused one of the Chinese ships of pointing a laser at an Australian patrol aircraft last month. So this article is targeted specifically at Australia. Let's continue unpacking this with a greater detail. So under the command of the PLA Southern Theatre Command Navy, the Far Sea Joint Training Flotilla, consisting of the Type 052D guided missile destroyer Hefei, the Type 054A guided missile frigate Huangshan, the Type 071 amphibious landing ship Jingangshan, the Type 903A comprehensive replenishment ship Honghu, and vessel-borne helicopters successfully completed its mission and returned to a port in Zhanjiang, South China's Zhanjiang. I'm not sure if I'm getting the pronunciation of that correct at all. South China's Guangdong province on Thursday morning, the PLA Navy said in a press release on Thursday. Australia is mentioned more than a few times. I think there are 14 mentions of Australia in total. We've already gone through the first two appearances and they popped up in the opening paragraph. A few more mentions of Australia, and this directly addresses the PLA and their reactions to Australia's Department of Defence. So the PLA Navy's announcement comes after Australia's Department of Defence claimed on February 19th that two PLA Navy vessels sailed through the Arafura Sea to the north of Australia on February 17th, transited through the Torres Strait and entered the Coral Sea. In the process, an Australian P-8A maritime patrol aircraft detected a laser emanating from one of the two PLA Navy vessels, illuminating the aircraft while in flight north of Australia. Australia accused the Chinese move of unprofessional and unsafe and could have endangered the safety and lives of the Australian personnel. Images released by the Australian Defence Department show that the two PLA warships are the Hefei and Jingangshan, which were taking part in the Far Sea Joint Training Flotilla, revealed on Thursday. Senior Colonel Tan Kefei, a spokesperson of China's Ministry of National Defence, said on February 21st that Australia's statement is completely inconsistent with the facts, and it was the Australian aircraft that flew close to the Chinese vessels and provocatively dropped sonar buoys. Australia is mentioned once again in the following paragraph, reading, "In the latest drill, Chinese warships dealt well with close-range tracking and monitoring by foreign vessels and aircrafts like those from Australia," the expert said, noting that this proved their capabilities and provided a great opportunity to train in realistic combat scenarios. No further mentions of Australia is found in this article, so that's a whopping 14 mentions within the same piece. I think it's pretty clear that this article is drawing a line in the fence, a clear case of the othering offensive taking place. And with that in mind, this, I believe, is a clear negative. We move along to the next article, and it also has to do with China's defense budget. Not the first time for the week, and this is published by Liu Xuanzun with the headline, "China boosts defense budget by 7.1% for 2022 amid complex global situation." Found in the military section of the Global Times. The article is accompanied with a video 2 minutes and 29 seconds in duration. It's also accompanied by an infographic from the Global Times artist Deng Zijun. And based on what we're looking at, it looks like in 2018, the total spend in terms of billion yuan was 1106. I contrast that to the spend in 2022, 1450 billion yuan. Accompanying that stat is the growth rate, which looks like in 2020, 6.6% year on year, if I'm reading this correctly, 6.8%, and just a marginal increase of 0.3% more than the previous year, and 0.2% from the year before that, for a total of 1450 billion yuan. The opening paragraph of the article reads, China announced on Saturday its plan to boost the country's defense budget by 7.1% to a total of 1.4 trillion yuan, or $230 billion in 2022, with analysts saying that the proposed budget growth is steady and reasonable at a time when China needs to modernize its military capabilities to safeguard national sovereignty and territorial integrity amid severe external threats and an unstable security environment. The next paragraph reads, the defense budget increase was mentioned in a draft budget report issued at the opening of the annual session of the National People's Congress, the NPC, the country's top legislature, on Saturday. Australia is mentioned in this article once. Apologies, that's twice. I need to make a correction to my notes. And it reads, just to provide a bit more context, I'll start with the paragraph before as well. This includes the US military's provocative monthly warship transits in the Taiwan Straits, close-in reconnaissance missions with spy planes in the East China Sea and the South China Sea, and warships intrusions into Chinese territorial waters in the South China Sea, not to mention its rallying of allies far away from China like France, Germany and the UK to send warships and join the trouble-stirring moves in the region, several experts reached by the Global Times pointed out. Australia is mentioned here in this paragraph, and it reads, the US also got Japan, India and Australia to join the Quad Security Dialogue and persuade Australia and the UK to join the AUKUS Security Pact to surround China. So, linking directly to the two-island chain strategy, the US also held intensive military exercises near China while sending the wrong signals to Taiwan secessionists by selling weapons to the island. China firmly opposes any separatist activities seeking Taiwan independence and firmly oppose foreign interference, the government's work report said. No further mentions of Australia would be found in this article, and based on how it's put together, I think this is pretty much a clear negative construction. We'll move along to the next article, and it looks like hot on the heels of the previous one published on March the 5th, published on March the 6th by the same author, Liu Xuanzun, is the headline, China's defense budget growth justified as restrained amid foreign media hype. The subheader reads, foreign media attempt to vilify military funding increase, according to analysts. Published March the 6th, 2022 at 8:10 p.m. The article is accompanied by the same infographic from before. And its opening paragraph reads, China's 7.1% increase to its defense budget in 2022 is a restrained move. that aims to safeguard the country's national sovereignty, territorial integrity, security, and development interests, as well as to provide public security goods to the world, experts said on Sunday, in response to Western media's one-sided interpretation that hypes the military spending plan being the fastest increase since 2019 and outpaces the country's GDP growth target. The figure, which would see the Chinese military receiving a total of 1.4 trillion yuan or $230 billion funding in 2022, was revealed on Saturday in a draft budget report released at the opening of the 5th session of the 13th National People's Congress, the NPC, the country's top legislature. So, despite admitting that China has kept its defense budget increased to single digit for 7 consecutive years, foreign media reports like those by Reuters and Bloomberg hyped the increase at being the fastest pace since the 7.5% proposed for 2019 and comes in above the targeted slower economic growth of around 5.5%. Let's take a closer look at mentions of Australia in the article, and it appears once, I believe. I'm just gonna quickly double check that. Yep, it appears once, and it reads, just to provide a bit more context, I'll read the paragraph before as well. Today's military development is making up for what was lost, and it is vital to have a military strength that matches China's comprehensive development status in order to safeguard the country's fruits of development, the veteran said. In fact, China still has room to increase its defense budget, but China is not seeking an arms race even when countries like the US, Japan, and Australia are greatly hiking their military spending, as China's aim is to safeguard its national sovereignty, security, and development interests, unlike some other countries' agendas, said Chinese military and expert and TV commentator Song Songping. No further mentions of Australia is found in this article, and based on that impression, I think it will fall under the category quite clearly as negative. We move along to the next article, and it relates to a loss in the world of sport. So found in the sports section of the Global Times, originally published by the AFP, March the 6th, 2022 at 6:46 p.m. with the headline, Shane Warne's body prepared for autopsy ahead of repatriation. The article is accompanied with a photograph of Shane Warne, and the opening paragraph of this piece reads, Thai authorities were preparing Sunday to conduct an autopsy on the body of Australian cricket superstar Shane Warne, who died of a suspected heart attack before flying him home, where he will receive a state funeral. Australia is mentioned 7 times in this article. I've just gone through the first. This is the second. Speaking about Warne being a part of a dominant Australian test team. Australia is mentioned again when relating to Warne's retirement from Australian duty, how he was a hero to the current generation of cricketers, according to Australian captain Pat Cummins. Also a mention of following his international retirement, Warne continued to star in the 2020 franchise circuit, appearing for the Rajasthan Royals in the Indian Premier League and in his hometown Melbourne Stars in Australia's Big Bash League. No further mentions of Australia is found in this article, and based on what I've read so far, I'm inclined to categorize this as a positive representation of Australia, highlighting some of this sporting individuals' highlights and contributions to the world of sport. We'll move along to the next article, and it was published on the 6th of March. Originally by Reuters, with the headline, Sydney expects more rain as death toll from floods rises. It's accompanied by a picture with the following captions: emergency service volunteers observed via Windsor Bridge under rising floodwaters along the Hawkesbury River. Opening paragraph reads, Sydney, Australia's most popular city, that has been drenched in rain for days, braced for more heavy downpours on Sunday as the death toll from flooding across the country's east rose to 17. So Australia is mentioned twice in the article. First of which in the captions, and following on from that in the opening paragraph. Based on this impression, I would like to think that Australia is represented over here in a neutral manner. With that in mind, we'll move along to the next article, and this is the final one for the week, the 19th article from the Global Times with a mention of Australia. And this appears in the opinion/editorial section of the Global Times with the headline, China's military development need not prove its innocence to the US and the West. Global Times editorial, published March the 6th, 2022 at 8:34 a.m. The article has the following opening paragraph. It's accompanied by an image of the Chinese military. And the opening paragraph reads, China's defense budget for 2022 is set at 1.45 trillion yuan, about $229 billion, up 7.1% from 1 year earlier, according to a report on the draft of central and local budgets for 2022 submitted to the National People's Congress. Some American and Western media seem to have been holding their breath for a long time to get the facts twisted, claiming that this is the fastest growth rate in 3 years, exceeding the GDP growth target, signaling continuing robust military spending, and challenging the US Armed Forces' dominance in the Indo-Pacific region. Well, it is clear that these interpretations are very good at permutations and argue in whichever way that can prove that China's threat is getting bigger. However, it's unlikely to be convincing if it is far-fetched. We'll take a closer look at mentions of Australia in this piece, and it appears twice in the same paragraph. And to provide a bit more context, I'm going to read the paragraph before that as well. Such accusations are based on a distorted defense concept. Several days ago, US Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell said that President Biden's next budget request must include at least 5% increase in defense spending above inflation. Some analysts believe that the US defense budget for fiscal year 2023 will top the $800 billion mark, which is equivalent to the total of more than 100 countries in the world. The US military spending is already very high, but it has fallen into a vicious circle of the more it spends on military, the more anxious it feels, and the more anxious it feels, the more it spends on military. Australia is mentioned here, and it reads, under Washington's leadership, a few staunch US allies are also upgrading military equipment. For example, Japan and Australia have significantly raised military spending in recent years. Australia even plans to boost its defense spending by 40% over the next 10 years. It must be said that Washington has provided the world a negative lesson on how to understand national defense development. Based on this impression, I think it's pretty clear that this is indeed an instance of an othering offensive taking place. Australia in this case represented and constructive pretty clearly in a negative manner. We move along to the Sky News Australia website next. Now that we've concluded our look at the Global Times, 19 mentions all up for the week starting from 28th of February, Monday, to Sunday, the 6th of March, 2022. The first article from Sky News Australia has the following headline: China maintains neutral stance on Russian-Ukraine crisis as it slams Western countries for deliberately taking sides. China has clarified its neutral stance on Russia's invasion of Ukraine after Australian Prime Minister expressed concerns over its lack of response to the crisis. Written by Crystal Wu, Digital Reporter, February 28th, 2022 at 12:30 p.m. The article is accompanied by a video, 2 minutes and 43 seconds in length, with the title Australia to provide lethal aid to Ukraine. Prime Minister Scott Morrison has declared nothing is off the table to make President Putin pay for his aggression against Ukraine. The article itself begins with the following opening paragraph. China's global propaganda outlet, the Global Times, insists its country remains neutral over Russia's invasion as it slammed Western countries for dominating the voice of the international community in favor of Ukraine. It comes as Russian President Vladimir Putin told his nuclear deterrent forces to be on high alert as he agreed to meet with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky for negotiations. China supports and encourages all diplomatic efforts conducive to a peaceful settlement of the Ukraine crisis, Chinese State Councillor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi said. China welcomes the earliest possible direct dialogue and negotiation between Russia and Ukraine, and while China supports a peaceful settlement of the Ukraine crisis, it will maintain a neutral stance to one day mediate the conflict, according to the Global Times. Some Western countries have started supplying arms to Ukraine because they've seen the possibility of further escalating and extending the conflict to leave Russia mired in the mud of Ukraine, said analysts, the outlet wrote. The article is further accompanied with another video entitled, Western countries probably wouldn't have much might against China and Russia, and that video is 2 minutes and 10 seconds long. The article continues to state this is actually bad for negotiations, as the longer the conflict continues, the more casualties there will be. The outlet criticized Western countries for sending reinforcements and providing weapons to Ukraine, saying it could potentially harm the livelihoods of Russian people. China's stance of neutrality is important because if there is one country that can one day effectively mediate the conflict, that country should be the one with real neutrality and which respects Ukraine's sovereignty and also did not follow the West in sanctioning Russia and harming the livelihood of Russian people. It added, in other words, the West is now deliberately taking sides, said analysts. The article is accompanied with another video, 1 minute and 10 seconds in duration. Morrison calls on China to denounce Russia's actions. Following on from that, Prime Minister Scott Morrison on Sunday expressed concerns over China's lack of response over the Russian invasion of Ukraine. He said while Western allies are joining forces to support Ukraine, China on Thursday announced its approval to import wheat from all regions of Russia, strengthening trade ties between the two countries. I particularly have become concerned at the lack of a strong response from China, Mr. Morrison said, reiterating Defense Minister Peter Dutton's criticism over Beijing's failure to respond to the attacks. The article is further accompanied by a video 7 minutes and 55 seconds in duration with the title Australia to Strengthen Military Support for Ukraine. Following on from that, the paragraph reads, at a time when the world was seeking to put additional sanctions on Russia, they eased restrictions on the trade of Russian wheat into China. At a time when Australia, together with the United Kingdom, together with the United States and Europe and Japan, are acting to cut off Russia, the Chinese government are following through on easing trade restrictions with Russia. And that's simply unacceptable. Based on this impression, I think it's pretty clear that this article is constructing and representing China in a negative manner. We'll move along to the final article in question for the week, the second of the two Sky News Australia news articles, and this one reads, China is Ukraine's only hope to stop Putin from progressing destructive invasion amid widespread bombing. Peter Dutton has warned that only China can stand in the way of Vladimir Putin now as Russian forces continue their grisly invasion of Ukraine. Written by Tyrone Clark, digital reporter, on March the 2nd, 2022. The article is accompanied with a video 8 minutes and 11 seconds in duration, and it's entitled Dutton Calls on China to Pressure Putin to Withdraw. The opening line of the article reads, Defense Minister Peter Dutton has called on Beijing to pressure Russia to end its brutal invasion of Ukraine, adding that only China can stop Vladimir Putin. China has steadfastly rejected calls to join the international sanction effort, as well as refusing to condemn the attacks on Ukraine. Beijing has even doubled down on the relationship in recent weeks, signing a no-limits treaty with Moscow and easing trade restrictions. However, Mr. Dutton said China was Ukraine's only hope for preventing Mr. Putin taking full control of the country. The article is accompanied with a video 4 minutes in length entitled Russia Closes In on Ukraine's capital city, Kyiv. The article further moves on to state the carnage that we're seeing right across the Ukraine at the very moment is very confronting, and I think it's going to intensify, Mr. Dutton told Sky News Australia. I wanted to go away, but we need to be realistic about the intent of somebody with Putin's mindset. It's only China really now that can stop Putin from progressing the way he is. The defense minister doubled down on demanding Chinese President Xi Jinping pick up the phone and change tact with the Russian strongman. The pressure should really be on President Xi to pick up that phone and instead of offering comfort, offering words of direction to President Putin, that he should withdraw from the Ukraine as quickly as possible, he continued. The article is accompanied with a photograph with the following captions. President Xi Jinping on the right is facing calls to pressure his close ally Vladimir Putin to end the invasion of Ukraine. The article continues to state it comes as Russia continued its air assault on Ukraine's two largest cities, Kyiv and Kharkiv. A security camera has captured the moment a Russian air missile struck a government building in Freedom Square, killing at least 10 people and injuring more than a dozen. Based on this impression of how China is represented and constructed, I think it's pretty clear that this would fall under the category of negative. With that in mind, everybody, this concludes our look at the Global Times 19 mentions of Australia, as well as Sky News Australia, 2 mentions of China. Thank you so much for your continued support of the Australia-China Media Watch podcast. I hope that this new format, which basically includes a scan of the headlines for the week before taking a deeper dive, has made this podcast a little bit more meaningful and hopefully helpful in helping you get a sense of both sides of the coin. Thank you very much, and thank you once again for your support.